sometimes the smallest words can cause the deepest ache. In my case, it was a sentence spoken over the edge of a porcelain teacup, on an ordinary Tuesday afternoon, in my own kitchen. "You're just an old maid now, Eleanor," my daughter-in-law sneered. "What does any of this matter to you anymore?" I stood there, holding the kettle in my trembling hand, listening as the water inside rattled louder than my own breath. Her words did not surprise me, not completely. They had been sitting behind her pretty smile for a long time. Still, hearing them out loud, in my home, in the place I once filled with laughter and lullabies, felt like a thin blade slipping between my ribs. She didn't even try to soften it. "Her name is Cynthia. My son's wife for nearly 6 years. A woman who walked into our family wrapped in charm and perfume, but who, with every passing season, peeled away another layer of kindness she never truly possessed." That day, she leaned against my kitchen counter as though she owned it, her long manicured nails tapping against the polished surface I had scrubbed for more years than she had been alive. My son, Daniel, sat at the table pretending to scroll through his phone. He didn't look up. He didn't defend me. His silence said more than any shout ever could. "You spend all day sitting in this empty house," Cynthia continued, glancing around as if she were surveying something old and useless. "No friends left. No husband. No purpose. It's actually quite sad when you think about it. I thought of my husband, gone now for 8 years. I thought of the hands that had once built a life with mine, brick by brick, promise by promise. I thought of the quiet nights after his passing when the walls still echoed with his voice. Those were moments that had shaped me. Moments that had given this house its soul. But to her, it was just an empty house. And this place," she added, pushing one of my chairs slightly with her foot, "it's going to need a real family soon. Someone younger. Someone with children. Not just memories." I slowly set the kettle down on the stove. My hands were quivering now, but I kept my back straight. I kept my voice low. "Even. This house has seen more love than you can imagine," I told her. "It has held births, weddings, reunions, and goodbyes. It doesn't require youth to give it meaning." She laughed, a short, sharp sound. "Ungrateful. Disrespectful. It requires ownership, Eleanor," she replied. "And from what Daniel told me, the paperwork will be taken care of soon." That was the moment something deep inside me went completely still. Paperwork. A strange calm washed over me. Not relief. Not fear. Just awareness. The kind that settles in when the world finally reveals its true face. I looked at Daniel. He still hadn't met my eyes. "What paperwork are you referring to?" I asked quietly. He hesitated before lifting his head. There was guilt there. I saw it. Clear as day. "Mom, we were just talking about the future, that's all," he said. "You shouldn't worry yourself over these things anymore." "Worry myself over my own home?" "You're getting old, Eleanor," Cynthia cut in smoothly. "We thought it would be best if we handled the bigger responsibilities moving forward." A slow burn crept up my spine. Bigger responsibilities. The mortgage that had been paid off 20 years ago. The roof I had repaired myself after storms. The land my husband and I had saved and sacrificed for. She was standing in the life I had built, and trying to erase me from it. Still, I said nothing. I walked slowly to the window and looked out into the garden I had planted with my own hands. The lavender bushes. The roses Daniel used to pick when he was small. The oak tree where he had once hung a swing. A life lived fully, reduced to an inconvenience in their plans. Cynthia came up behind me. "You know, if you really cared about your son," she whispered, "you would do the sensible thing and sign whatever papers we put in front of you." For a moment, I considered turning around, raising my voice, ending it all right there. But instead, I smiled. A small, quiet smile. And in that moment, she mistook my silence for surrender. What she didn't know, what neither of them knew, was that the house she believed would soon belong to her never left my name in the first place. And that was only the beginning. People often think an old woman's mind is slow, that memories come scattered and confused like fallen leaves. They are wrong. My memories are sharp, sometimes sharper than the present itself. And when Cynthia spoke about ownership, when she dared to suggest that I no longer had a place in the life I had built, my mind didn't break. It traveled. It went back through time. Back to the day this house first became mine. I was not always an old maid, as she so cruelly put it. Once, I was a young bride with soil under my nails, hope in my heart, and a stubborn belief that love meant building something lasting. My husband, Thomas, and I had nothing but a shared dream and a pile of worn-out furniture that we found on the side of the road. We had chosen this land because nobody else wanted it. The soil was rocky. The grass grew in uneven patches. The real estate agent looked at us as though we were foolish when we signed the papers. "Are you sure?" he had asked. "There's nothing special about this place." Thomas squeezed my hand. "That's exactly why we like it," he said with a smile. "We'll make it special." And we did. Slowly. Carefully. Brick by brick. I watched that tired, empty land turn into a garden. I watched wooden posts become walls. I watched thin air become a home. We salvaged what we could, repaired what we could not replace, and prayed through the nights when money was tight and storms howled against the frames we had built ourselves. Some people inherit their lives. We created ours. Years later, when Daniel was born, I stood in the front room holding him in my trembling arms and whispered a promise into his soft, sleeping ear. "This will always be your home, my love." But as the years passed, the meaning of that promise quietly changed. Because a home is not only walls and ceilings. It is respect. It is memory. It is gratitude. And somewhere along the way, my son had forgotten those things. Thomas had never trusted easily. Not with banks. Not with distant relatives. Not even with Daniel in his later years, when he sensed how easily influence could creep into a person's heart. He was careful. Thoughtful. Protective. Especially when it came to me. One evening, a few years before he passed, he handed me a folder. Inside it were legal documents, neatly organized and signed. "Eleanor," he had said gently, "this house, it will always be yours. No matter what happens. No one can touch it without your permission. Not family. Not the government. Not even our son." I remember looking at him in confusion. "Why would you ever think Daniel would take this from me?" I asked. He only stroked the side of my face, his eyes heavy with knowing sadness. "People change," he murmured. "Sometimes more than we are ready to admit." I didn't want to believe him then. Daniel was still the little boy who ran through the yard with a stick in his hand, pretending to be a soldier, a king, a hero. He was still the child who climbed into my bed during thunderstorms, trembling at every rumble in the sky. But Thomas had seen things I had ignored. And so, quietly, we placed the house into an irreversible trust, in my name only. It was not public knowledge. It was not discussed at family dinners. And after Thomas passed, I simply folded the papers away and continued to live as I always had. Modest. Silent. Unassuming. I let them believe the house was something they could one day claim. It was easier that way. So when Cynthia walked through my front door for the first time, complimenting the crown molding with practiced admiration, I saw no need to correct her assumption that one day this would all be hers. When she began bringing expensive decor catalogs and casually laying them around the living room, pointing to sofas she preferred and rugs she thought would refresh the space, I said nothing. And when she eventually started referring to it as our house, still, I said nothing. Because there is a power in silence most people do not understand. They mistake it for weakness. In truth, it is patience. Standing there in the kitchen, curtain light whispering across my aging hands, I felt no fear at Cynthia's words. Only clarity. They had planned their future on a lie they created. A lie that I had allowed them to carry. And now, it was almost time for the truth to breathe. Daniel finally stood from the table, walking toward me with a softness that came far too late. "Mom," he said, touching my arm carefully. "You know we love you, right? This is just progress. A transition. Change is hard, but this is how things go when families grow. Families grow. Yes. And sometimes they grow crooked." I turned to face him at last. "You're right, Daniel," I said quietly. And I meant it. Because change was coming. They just didn't realize yet. It wouldn't be in their favor. That night, I lay in my bed without turning off the lamp. The ceiling above me looked the same as it had for decades, soft cracks like tiny rivers, little bumps where old paint had settled unevenly. This room had witnessed my youth, my love, my grief, my healing. My husband's last breath had been drawn in this very spot, his hand still warm in mine as the world slowly emptied around him. And now they wanted to take it. Not with respect, not with conversation, but with paper and manipulation, quiet as a thief slipping through an open window. I heard their voices downstairs. Low. Muffled. Calculating. Cynthia always spoke in that sharp whisper, the one meant to sound loving if overheard, but sharp enough to cut when no one else was listening. "She's getting weaker," she said. "Did you see how she barely spoke today?" "She's just tired," Daniel replied, his voice filled with something that almost sounded like regret. "Or she's finally realizing this house is bigger than her now," Cynthia murmured. "And we're the only ones capable of handling it." I closed my eyes slowly. We. As if love was measured in square footage. I rose from my bed and walked quietly to the top of the stairs. I did not want them to see me listening. I only wanted to hear how far their ambition reached. "We could have real parties here," Cynthia continued dreamily. "Renovate the kitchen, build a bigger patio. This place could be so much if it wasn't, stuck in time like a museum for her memories." "She doesn't have to move out completely," Daniel said weakly. "Maybe we can just take over the paperwork, pay the bills." "No, Daniel," she pressed. "The house has to be ours. Completely. Or she'll always have an excuse to interfere in our lives." A slow, silent breath filled my lungs. Interfere, in their lives. I had given him everything. And all he saw was inconvenience. A strange thing happens when the heart is finally wounded enough. The pain dulls. And in its place comes something colder, steadier. Clarity. I stepped back into the shadows of the hallway and returned to my room. On the dresser sat an old photograph of my husband and me, taken a year after we moved into the house. I was younger. Thinner. My eyes still sparkled with dreams that had not yet been tested by grief or betrayal. His arm was wrapped around my shoulders. I lifted the frame. "They've forgotten you, Thomas," I whispered. But I haven't. I knew then exactly what I needed to do. The next morning, I played the role they had already assigned to me. The frail old woman. The defeated widow. The outdated relic clinging to the past. I made tea and handed Cynthia a cup first. I asked her about her plans for the week, complimented her taste in clothing, even told her she had a good head for organization. She looked at me, confused by my sudden gentleness. "You're being awfully agreeable today," she said, her eyes narrowing slightly. "I suppose old age does that to a person," I replied softly. "Makes you realize when it's time to let go." Daniel shifted uncomfortably in his chair. "Mom, you don't have to do anything you're not ready for," he said. I waved a tired hand. "Oh, don't worry, dear. I understand now. Holding on too long can be selfish." Those words sent relief washing over Cynthia's face. I saw it clearly. "Exactly," she said, smiling for the first time in days. "It's very mature of you to finally accept the situation." Accept the situation. As if it were theirs to offer in the first place. I nodded slowly. "I only have one request," I added gently. "When the time comes, I would like to be present when the paperwork is signed. It would bring me peace to see where my life has led." "Of course," Daniel replied, far too quickly. Cynthia's eyebrows lifted for a moment, then relaxed. She must have believed that watching my own erasure would be its own kind of punishment. She didn't understand. I didn't need to be present for my defeat. I needed to be present for my victory. That very afternoon, they contacted a lawyer. Not Thomas's old friend, a new one, unfamiliar with our history. A stranger who saw only papers, not people. He arranged a meeting for the following day. Everything was moving fast. Just the way Cynthia liked it. That evening, I locked myself in the small study near the back of the house, the one no one ever entered. Inside the bottom drawer of Thomas's old desk, hidden beneath letters yellowed by time, lay the envelope I had not touched in years. The real deed. The real truth. My hands trembled as I took it out, not with fear, but with memory. His handwriting was still perfectly clear. For Eleanor alone. Tomorrow, the illusion they had built would collapse into nothing. And the only thing left standing would be the woman they thought had already disappeared. The morning arrived far too quietly. There was no thunder in the sky, no warning in the air, no sign from the universe that something irreversible was about to happen. The sun came through the kitchen window like it always did, touching the edge of the old wooden table where my husband and I had shared thousands of cups of coffee, thousands of simple mornings. I prepared breakfast as usual. Bacon in the pan. Toast in the toaster. 2 eggs for Daniel. None for myself. Cynthia came down the stairs dressed in a pale silk blouse, the kind she wore when she wanted to feel important. She glanced around the kitchen, not at me, but at the furniture, the shelves, the windows, as if she were mentally rearranging it all already. "Smells good," she said casually. "You'll miss this kitchen when you're in a smaller place." I didn't answer her. I simply placed the plate in front of my son and sat slowly in my chair. Daniel still couldn't meet my eyes. There was a gentle knock at the front door just after 9. 3 short taps. Professional. Precise. Final. "That must be him," Cynthia said, pushing her chair back before anyone else had even moved. "Lawyer." I remained seated as Daniel opened the door and welcomed the stranger inside. He was younger than I expected. Maybe mid-40s. Gray starting to appear at his temples. A briefcase in his hand. A polite smile that didn't know the story it had walked into. "Good morning," he said. "I'm here regarding the property transfer." Property. Not home. Not memories. Not my life. Just property. We gathered in the living room. The same place where I had once rocked Daniel to sleep as a child. The same place Thomas had proposed to me on one rainy evening 50 years ago. Now it would become a place of erasure. Daniel sat on one side of the coffee table, Cynthia on the other. The lawyer placed his briefcase down carefully and opened it with deliberate slowness. He began pulling out papers, stacking them in neat piles like he was laying out the steps of a ritual. "And you must be Mrs. Eleanor Hayes," he said, turning to me with a practiced smile. "Yes," I answered simply. He handed me a pen first. "If you'll just sign here, Mrs. Hayes, we can begin the transfer process to your son and daughter-in-law." He slid the first document toward me. I looked down at the page, though I already knew exactly what it said. I had memorized the words long before he even printed them. Cynthia leaned forward slightly in her seat. "This is just a formality," she said, her voice sweet in front of the stranger. "We want to make sure everything is taken care of for her future." My future. That made me almost smile. I placed my hand gently over the document. "Before I sign anything," I said softly, "there is something I'd like to share." Daniel stiffened. The lawyer looked up. "Of course, ma'am. Take your time." I reached for the small envelope I had hidden in the pocket of my cardigan. My hands were steady. My mind was clear. Slowly, deliberately, I placed it on the table. Cynthia's eyes moved to it instantly. "What's that?" she asked. "A memory," I replied. Then, just as slowly, I slid the envelope toward the lawyer. "Could you read what's inside for us?" I asked him politely. He hesitated for a moment, confused by the request, but eventually opened it. He removed the document hidden within and began to scan the top of the page. His expression changed. Then he adjusted his glasses. Then he began reading again. More carefully this time. "This is unusual," he murmured. "What is it?" Daniel asked, his voice suddenly tense. The lawyer lifted his eyes. "This is the original property deed," he said, tapping the paper gently. "Dated 37 years ago." Cynthia let out a small laugh. "That's impossible. The house is in Daniel's name now. We've already checked the records." "Yes," the lawyer responded slowly, "but according to this, the property has never left Mrs. Hayes' legal ownership. It is registered entirely and solely to her name." Silence fell so heavy I could hear the clock ticking on the wall. "That can't be right," Cynthia snapped, standing up. "Someone made a mistake." "There is no mistake," he replied calmly. "The signatures are valid. The seal is original. And the registration number matches the city archives." She turned to Daniel, her face beginning to pale. "You said you and your father handled all of this years ago," she whispered sharply. Daniel looked at me for the first time in a way I hadn't seen in years. Confused. Scared. Small. My voice was quiet when I finally spoke. "Your father made sure the house would always be mine. He knew one day you might forget who built the ground you stand on." Cynthia turned back to the lawyer, her composure cracking. "So, what does this mean?" she demanded. He closed the folder slowly. "It means Mrs. Hayes is the sole legal owner of this property," he said. "And if she so chooses, she can decide who stays here and who does not." Her gaze settled on me again, but this time, there was no sneer. There was panic. And something else. Fear. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't need to. I simply looked at her and said the words that had waited patiently for this exact moment. "In my house, respect is not optional." Cynthia's hand tightened around the back of the chair in front of her, her fingers turning almost white from the pressure. For a second, she didn't speak at all. She simply stared at the document the lawyer had placed on the table, as if sheer disbelief could make the words disappear. "That doesn't make sense," she said at last. "There must be updated paperwork somewhere. Something newer. Something I haven't seen." The lawyer shook his head gently. "Ma'am, The only legally valid document is right here. Any other papers would be considered meaningless. Daniel swallowed hard. So, what are you saying? He asked quietly. The lawyer looked at him with a kind of professional sympathy. I'm saying that your mother owns this home. Fully. Legally. And the decision of who stays here and who leaves belongs entirely to her. A heavy silence fell over the room once more. I could feel generations of voices moving through me in that moment, my mother's strength, my grandmother's patience, my husband's quiet wisdom. For years, I had been invisible in my own home. For years, my voice had been softened, swallowed, ignored. But now the house itself had remembered me. Cynthia let go of the chair and slowly sat back down, her earlier confidence broken into sharp, uneven breaths. You planned this, she murmured, eyes fixed on the floor. No, I replied calmly. I simply survived long enough for the truth to find its way back to me. Her lips parted slightly, as if she wanted to argue, to insult, to belittle me once again, but the words had nowhere to stand anymore. They had lost their ground. Daniel ran his hands over his face. Why didn't you ever tell me? He asked, a strange mixture of shame and confusion in his voice. You never asked, I answered. And you never listened long enough to hear anything that wasn't coming from your own mouth. His eyes filled with something wet and dangerous. Regret came too late to be useful. You were really going to put me in a nursing home, I continued quietly. Not because I needed care. But because I had become inconvenient. I thought it was best for you, he stammered. No, I said, shaking my head slowly. You thought it was best for your marriage. And for your comfort. I turned to Cynthia then. She still hadn't lifted her gaze. You walked through these rooms calling me an old maid, a burden, a shadow who should be grateful for leftovers, I said calmly. Yet you slept beneath a roof my hands paid for. You warmed your body in a home that smelled like my life. You dared to erase me from a place built by my sweat. She finally looked up at me, and there were tears in her eyes now. Not tears of remorse. Tears of panic. What are you going to do? She whispered. The room froze at her question. The lawyer straightened slightly. Daniel stopped breathing. My answer did not come fast. It didn't need to. Power doesn't rush. I am going to walk through my home again, I said quietly. And decide which rooms still belong to memories, and which must be cleared of disrespect. Daniel's breath trembled. You're not serious, Cynthia murmured. You can't just throw us out. I looked directly into her eyes for the first time without softness. Yes, I said. I can. A sob escaped her lips now. You would really do that to your own son, she cried. I turned back to Daniel. I would never do this to my son, I said. But the man sitting in front of me stopped being my son the moment he chose humiliation over protection. That hit him harder than any shouting ever could. His shoulders sagged, not with anger, but finally, shame. The lawyer quietly cleared his throat. Mrs. Hayes, he said softly, do you wish to proceed with a formal eviction, or is there another arrangement you'd like to make? I looked around my living room, at the faded photograph on the wall, at the old couch, at the lamp Thomas had repaired 3 times just so I wouldn't have to replace it. This house has heard too many hurtful words, I whispered. It needs silence again. Cynthia finally rose to her feet, her control completely gone. Where are we supposed to go? She cried out. That, I said calmly, is no longer my problem to solve. Daniel slowly stood up beside her. He looked at me once more, truly looked at me, not as something in the way, but as the woman who had once carried him, sacrificed for him, and now finally chose herself over him. I'm sorry, Mom, he said weakly. I didn't answer. Not because I didn't hear him. but because some apologies arrive far too late to hold any meaning. The lawyer gathered his papers, now arranged very differently than he had expected. He handed the deed back to me with a respectful nod. "Everything is in order, Mrs. Hayes," he said. "No one can take this place away from you." I stood up then, slowly, with the dignity of a woman who had carried too much for too long. "For years, I thought my strength came from loving others," I said. "Today, I realized it came from remembering myself." Daniel and Cynthia walked to the door in silence. No arguments. No last insults. Only the sound of their footsteps leaving the life they thought they were inheriting. When the door finally closed behind them, the house breathed again. And for the first time in many years, so did I. When the door finally closed behind them, the silence was not empty. It was full. Full of memories. Full of breath. Full of a life that was finally mine again. For several moments, I remained standing in the middle of the living room, listening to the faint echoes of their departure slowly fade down the hallway. No voices. No accusations. No demands. Only the familiar hum of the house settling into itself, as though it, too, had been holding its breath for years. I walked slowly over to the window. Outside, the sky was painted with the soft colors of evening, pale gold melting into lavender, fading into blue. The same sky I had watched through this glass for decades. The same sky that had witnessed my laughter, my tears, my waiting, my hoping, my breaking, and now, my return. I pressed my palm gently against the cool glass. "You're safe again," I whispered. And I wasn't sure if I was speaking to the house, or to myself. I drifted through the rooms one by one, touching familiar corners as though greeting old friends. The kitchen where I had cooked thousands of meals. The hallway where my son once ran laughing, his small feet echoing like music. The bedroom where I had cried quietly into my pillow on nights when loneliness felt heavier than sleep. The house had carried every version of me. The young bride. The exhausted mother. The grieving widow. The invisible old woman. And now, the woman who had finally remembered her own name. I brewed myself a cup of tea and sat at the small dining table that no longer felt like a place for arguments or tension. Just a place to be. Steam curled lazily into the air as I watched the sun disappear behind the neighboring rooftops. For the first time in years, I didn't feel unwanted. I didn't feel in the way. I didn't feel like something that needed to be moved, hidden, adjusted, or erased. I felt present. And in that presence, I felt Thomas, my husband, as clearly as if he were sitting beside me. He always said, "One day, they'll understand your value too late. But I hope you won't need their understanding to know who you are." I smiled softly at the empty chair across from me. "You were right," I whispered. In the days that followed, the world outside began to move again. The neighbors came by. Some with questions. Some with rumors. Some with quiet admiration in their eyes. Word traveled faster than I expected. They said I had kicked my son out. They said I was cold. They said I was brave. They said I was heartless. They said I was finally free. I did not argue with any of them. Because when you finally choose yourself, it will always look like cruelty to those who benefited from your silence. I planted new flowers in the garden. Bright ones. Bold ones. Colors I had never chosen before because someone else always had an opinion. I moved the furniture. Opened the curtains wider. Let the sun touch places it hadn't reached in years. I started waking up earlier, not because I had to help someone, but because I wanted to feel the morning. Sometimes I sat on the porch with my tea and simply watched people pass by. Each step they took reminded me of a simple truth. Everyone is moving somewhere. But not everyone is choosing where they go. One afternoon, my phone rang. Daniel's name appeared on the screen. I stared at it for a long moment. Then I turned the phone face down. Not because I hated him, but because, for once, I loved myself more than I loved his regret. Healing is not dramatic. It's quiet. Unnoticed. Slow. It's choosing peace over being understood. It's choosing silence instead of explanation. It's choosing rest over revenge. And yet, somehow, in that quiet, there is the softest, most powerful kind of victory. Sometimes, when the evening settles in and the shadows grow long on the floor, I sit by the window again. I watch the world keep spinning. And I laugh. Not loudly. Not bitterly. Just a gentle, knowing smile that rises from a place so deep inside me that no one else could ever touch it. Because the last laugh isn't a sound. It's a woman sitting in her own home, untouched by betrayal, untouched by shame, untouched by the expectations that once caged her. It's a woman who survived love, loss, humiliation, and silence. It's a woman who finally learned that dignity is not given. It is chosen. And in choosing myself, I became richer than any inheritance I was ever promised.